pulled them down into a trailer.
So he'll use, is it Richie or Movers?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They've done some amazing.
When are they, do
Yeah.
they have a date?
No,
How are you?
racing to get his
Not
driveway
that far away,
installed, a new foundation poured over there.
No, is anyone else showing up?
Well, we don't know.
Yes, yes, yeah. Get it out of the trailer and get it somewhere.
When are they, do they have a date?
Might have Jack.
No.
When I have YouTube going.
Yeah.
Yeah, the feedback, yeah. I think that's,
Was Richie, who was the one that was moving the house across Bird Lake or Walloon on the ice? And the ice softened and it went,
Oh, no.
was that, and I don't think it was, I think it was maybe somebody prior to them, but it was, I can't remember if it was Bird or Walloon. And it was a great idea, right? Right up to the shoreline, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
I don't know what they did, if they ended up,
I think that was Bert.
I think it was Bird, and they ended up breaking it up, or I don't know if they got, they had to get it out of there, can't leave it in the lake.
It was Walloon.
Was it Walloon?
It was Walloon, and I just asked about that this winter, and that they, in the spring, or when they pulled it all, piece by piece out.
Oh, geez. That's a bad day. So better luck with your garage.
Okay.
Yeah, put it on the ice, yeah.
Well, the story in Cadillac on Lake Mitchell, they were doing that. And this was like 100 and some years ago. And the house went through the ice and took the horses with it that were towing it. I think it was a team of 12 horses or something like that. And they all went on through.
I like to go in the water in the summer. with a boat.
The horses off too.
Never really been, yeah, the horses didn't have that, well, they didn't have a choice.
Get me out of this.
So 5:31, we have Mary Catherine, we can wait for her to return, and then
We have 5.
5, so we can,
survive.
we'll call the order, call roll when she walks back in.
yeah, Jack was a maybe, George was a no.
Okay. And
Mark
Emily was
said
a
he
no.
would be here.
I think I heard a door. There he is.
Hi, Mark.
Mark?
Well, should we call the roll, please?
Yes, absolutely. We'll start with Beth Holly. Are you here?
I'm here. I'm in Vero Beach, Florida.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Mary Catherine Hanna.
Here.
Bill Mulder.
Here.
Mark Boudet.
Here.
Andrew Bowman.
Here.
Al Dyka. Here. And is Jacob Krieger on Zoom? Any other members on Zoom? So just the two?
It's just that, yeah.
All right. But that gives us 6. We have a quorum.
Great. Moving on to minutes from the April 15th meeting. Any comments or corrections?
They look good to me. I don't remember.
I don't remember. I don't remember.
I do need to change the signature line at the very end. That one out, it still has Andrew Potter's name on it.
I wonder why I was in red.
My name will replace that.
Okay. Any other changes other than the signature line? Going once, going twice. We have a motion to approve the minutes from April 15th.
So moved.
Well, you can do it.
How about you get it and he's the second?
Sure.
All right. Would you do a roll call just because we are on split realities?
Absolutely. Al Dyka,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Yes.
Mark Boudet,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Mary Catherine Hand,
Yeah.
and Beth Holly.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Public comment correspondence. Has there been any, there was nothing in the packet, but has there been any emails or correspondence? Okay. Anybody on, no one obviously here. Anyone on Zoom or YouTube with a comment for something that's not on tonight's agenda?
We only have one watching on YouTube, so.
Okay. Moving on to new and old business. Discussion of the master plan goals and objectives. Jeff, you'd sent out an email right before the meeting, which was helpful to remind where we left off last time. And Larry, there was a memorandum at the bottom of the packet. Is there an order that you guys think, let's pick up where we left off, or should we review the memorandum, or just start on, I think it was survey 2, question 7.
Survey 2, question 8, I believe, that's the last part that was in the minutes
Okay.
from our last meeting. And I believe we had been progressing through them in order from Victor's memo.
Okay.
And I believe they're just in that order. If you guys want to pick up where we left off?
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. It's, I think it's been a month or two since we've been to this. So
I think we had actually discussed question 8 from notes that I have. That basically the planning commission had no comments on that language that was presented there.
So that would, just to review, that was the actions under goal 2, objective D, specify that landscape plans for parks should incorporate trees. No one's changed their mind on that in the last month or two. Good. I already hit scroll and lost my place, so.
Page 7, bottom of page 7.
Good.
Page 13 of the packet.
Okay,
Yeah.
so question 9, survey 2.
Yep.
Summary, nearly 2/3 of respondents feel that having trees is equally important to having views of the bay. Did anyone have any comments or thoughts on the actions recommended under that summary? Consider revising language about views to include cautionary statements such as finding the appropriate balance. I think that's a good thing to have. Anyone have any comments or thoughts on that action that's been considered?
That's a good recommendation. It's a red hot issue, and I think this is the only solution, is to acknowledge both are important.
But how do you define appropriate?
Well, I think that's, as a goals are somewhat vague, and I think our objectives and action items in particular would want to get more specifics. I would imagine the appropriate balance would be determined by, for example, the policymakers at that time, right? So, but as far as the master plan goes, you might want to say something like, consider a, well, we did it just in a tree plan, consider, you had even though it was shot down at one of the previous council meetings in the fall, a bluff side vegetation management that incorporates both, the concerns about the slope stability for the residents below and the need for trees, as well as the view shed from the people above and passing by. So, kind of emphasizing that whatever policies we enact or things we take on, that we emphasize both, that we have to pay attention to both of those, not just one. So what the appropriate balance is always going to be swayed from public opinion, depending on who's on the council. And
Well,
what the public sentiment is.
And whose ox is being gored?
And the really good thing about this is, I think the goal needs to reflect the tree committee here in the city. Because we're not really experts in trees but we can certainly establish a land use goal and of supporting objectives that basically enhances and puts more credence in some guidelines for the tree committee. We certainly don't want to conflict with them. We certainly don't want to try to usurp what they're doing as a very specific group assigned to trees here in the city. We don't want to really, tell them what to do. But we need to take this goal idea from the question 9 here in survey 2 and support that idea with what we put in our goals and objectives.
I think that's a good reminder for a lot of these topics as we go through them is we could spend all night just on that, and we aren't going to solve those issues and resolve each thing, even the short-term rental, all the ones that are coming up. We sort of have to acknowledge that they are an issue in sort of the general direction, but not, what we do about short-term rentals in 2021 might be different than what we did in 2018, which would be different. But we want the master plan to sort of.
The vision.
Yeah.
This is the direction we want to head to.
Right.
So what we're saying here is we don't just want to focus on views. We don't just want to focus on trees. We want to focus on both. And maybe as we get to the actions, we can have a little more specifics based on what the planning commission members want.
And the public input that we.
But
hope
we're
to
not
get.
here, we're not here to craft the code right now or the regulations. We're here to give vision for the community. And then, like Larry said, the tree committee then will take that vision as direction of council staff and incorporate trees according to that goal.
Right, but it's that way, right? I mean, the tree board is lovely, but they take their direction from the master plan, not we wait and see what the tree board's gonna do.
Right, but we would
and
say,
then craft our
based on the
master
input that
plan.
we've been able to receive over from the survey and our own personal interactions with people around town, is that both, it's not just the views of the bay and it's not just trees everywhere. It's the
Right.
balance. And I think to Mark's question, what's appropriate will potentially change a little bit with the times and what they think is appropriate.
I just, I understand, this has to be a fluid document, but it just words like appropriate.
Maybe-
Well, we can work that, yeah.
Yeah, it's just that word that I think has, that could be a very loaded word.
You might even say finding an acceptable balance as opposed to appropriate, because, I mean, it's.
Yeah, something like
it
that
has to-
actually,
That might,
that has a little bit more clarity to.
Yeah,
to
and it
me
may
than appropriate.
imply more of a give and take than appropriate. Appropriate tends to be what one,
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it's a little more.
Well, appropriate is value laden.
Exactly.
There's
It's
a
a
judgment
positive
that goes
and a
with
negative.
appropriate,
Thank you. Yeah.
whereas acceptable is what can all of the parties agree to.
Right. Usually, but, and the parties are gonna change over time.
Or
Yeah,
just,
they will.
or just leaving that word out, totally,
Yeah.
finding the balance of
Okay.
maintaining views.
Actually,
Perfect.
well done.
Yay.
That's it. I'm happy.
Good. Okay. Any other?
May I say something?
Absolutely not.
The word quaint community, I don't think fits.
Yeah, so the reason that's in there, Beth, is because that is the current, that's what the survey was about, was one of the current goals. And one of the current goals is about creating a quaint and vibrant community. So that's something that we talked about, what is quaint? So that's the reason that was in there, is because this question had to deal with a
An
vibrant,
existing-
how trees and views relate to a vibrant and quaint
And
community.
the quaint, that was from the existing master plan
Yes,
language.
exactly.
So we've already, I think we've talked about maybe scrubbing that word
Yeah.
or, coming
Did
up with-
we talk about not using that word?
Yes, yeah, and it wouldn't be in a new draft, Beth, it's just in this is referencing, this question was based on the existing goal and objective, which used that word, but it's not a word that we're necessarily gonna carry forward into the new draft. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, survey 2, question 10, summary, 2/3 of respondents feel that having trees is equally important to having views in the bay.
That's a repeat.
That's a repeat.
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry, yeah.
Deja vu.
I read that, I did that at home when I reviewed this, and I did it again.
I
Ron Burgundy. Yep. So, survey 2, question 11. Significant majority of respondents believe that cities should consider a neighborhood's capacity to accommodate short-term rentals. Again, there's a lot. This topic is, important, and will get thoroughly vetted as we kind of reconsider maybe the short-term rental ordinances after we redo the master plan. But I think the action is a good recommendation, that maybe we evaluate each different zoning district, residential and central business district, and see what we feel those individual districts can support. Because it would be different potentially in the CBD as it would be from, R1 or R2, one of those. So are there any thoughts or comments on the actions suggested? And then there's below, considering including specific language about the history or present status of short-term rentals.
was thinking in the language, perhaps, just, it's not a short-term rentals are a thing, we just haven't mentioned in the previous master plan, just
Yeah.
acknowledge that they are an issue.
Sure. Any thoughts other than what has been sort of spelled out in the recommended actions? And I think that's a process we would sort of undertake, like we've done with other things, set aside a block of months and series of meetings to just have it on the agenda and review each district on its own, and hopefully get public input on that, because
I think that's a good way to go.
Well, but I think, when we do that, and I think that is a great plan moving forward, there should definitely be an overall consideration of the total balance of short-term rentals versus other types of vacation accommodation versus
Full-time.
long-term housing,
Yeah.
full-time housing. So, yes, great, but also keep in mind what the overall balance is so that we don't get out of whack.
right.
As opposed to the appropriate balance.
Yeah. Just a balance, yeah.
So this action would take place outside of the master plan. It would be a follow.
Something, I think it'd be an objective that we would then look at and say, okay, is this, in 2021, can we get to it, or is it straddle 20?
Yes, so
Sort
the
of set an
objective-
objective that we can tick off before we review the master plan again,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It's basically an action item within the master plan. It's not the solution in the master plan.
Right.
It's not gonna dictate that in the master plan, the goal is to, restrict short-term rentals to 25% of the housing stock in the city. Okay, I've done that back a long time ago with mobile home parks. We only want X percentage of mobile homes within our community. Yeah, because it was back in the heyday,
Yeah.
how old I know, so, there was a huge push for mobile home parks. And communities used to do that. Right now, there's a huge push for short-term rentals. Okay, and regulating those and putting a percent of your housing stock is an excellent way to do that. And we even may want to get down to an area or a district other than a zoning district, or even a block basis. That in no one block, there'd be more than X number or a percentage of housing in short-term rentals because of the impact on the neighborhood. So it just depends on how we want to
Well,
decide.
again, I
I'm not
think-
suggesting that's what we do.
I think for tonight,
But it's
we need to-
something that we need to put in the plan that.
Okay, I just want to
at some
shift us
point in
away
the
from
future, we're
impact
gonna
on the
study
neighborhood.
As to what's gonna go on.
well, I think again, right now, we're doing exactly what we don't want to do, which is try to
Right.
figure out what we're going to do with short-term rentals in the long term. I think tonight, we are acknowledging in the master plan, we are going to make an actionable item, that is, we will go back and we think this district by district with a look at the total impact of, hey, for every short-term rental, you're potentially taking away a long-term rental, or you're increasing, anyway. So we get into those details that for tonight, I think we'll be here all until tomorrow if we get too far into that. But you had a comment on?
I don't like the impact on the neighborhood language but that's
What would you like to
that
see
is
in
for the
second?
long-term discussion, because we're not setting that goal language. That's
Right.
not gonna get that's not gonna get memorialized here in this discussion, so it's fine for another time.
Okay, so and I think also acknowledging the comment under A, consider including specific language about the history and present status of short-term rentals. I think it just, sort of maybe summarized briefly. We used to have a 1-week minimum, through the staff's good work. Brought our attention, that's really unenforceable, and that's why we have now. So maybe both short-term rentals is a topic, and then also Harbor Springs specific history of short-term rentals and how we've handled them in the past, and what we did 2 or 3 years ago to license them, basically. So, all good on that topic. 11, question 11. And survey 2, question 12. 2/3 of respondents want the city to increase/improve communication with seasonal homeowners. That's a good, certainly a good goal. And the action was to emphasize that expanded information exchange should include communication with year-round residents and second homeowners, effectively all taxpayers. And I think even my only thought on that was that, a long-term renter is not necessarily a taxpayer, but they're certainly a resident. So just some way of, acknowledging that it's not necessarily a taxpayer, but a full-time, part-time resident.
They're paying the taxes and.
They're paying it on yeah. So.
But more generally, I guess I'm not up to speed on this. What would this look like? I mean, how do you increase your communication? I forget what the intent was here.
So the intent is, so if you're talking about increasing communication, whether it's, I guess, email lists, newsletters, using social media, reaching out to different people with information that might affect them. I think there's a goal in I think there's a goal in the master plan that talks about reaching out, and I don't know exactly which one it is, but I think there's one that talks about that, reaching out to communication from staff. Communicating with staff is doing here to the public in general.
I think one comment we've all probably gotten over the years is people who are seasonal, just sort of wishing they had more idea of what was going on. And I think an opt-in, with an email newsletter, or just an ability to have even if it's something, it's not extra work for the staff, but it's just the agenda for meetings. If somebody wants to have one emailed to them, they can just opt in, and then it's based on their level of interest. And at
Yeah,
least they
well, I
know.
guess, well, you sort of hit the nail on the head. All my concerns is, are we just adding more work onto the staff? The reality of today is, the city has a website. You go to the website, you find everything you need, it's right there.
Unfortunately, what I find with that is, look, we put everything on the website, we have one person here in the crowd, like, do we want more people to be engaged in government? And, what is the balance of staff working to, give the public the information they need to understand the decisions we're making that could impact them, as opposed to, one of the things that we've done was, for example, we post our agendas now at the IGA and the post office, because people don't come here to City Hall to look at an agenda. And so we figured if we put them at the IGA and the post office, people will walk by them. So it's a little extra work for us, yes, but, it's something small to increase communication, letting the public know what's going on. So I mean,
Yeah, so the communication really is what we're trying to do, is to get engagement
Yeah.
with the community, so they're more
get their input,
interactive with our city, which is
essentially.
what we're trying to do.
And so they're more knowledgeable of the decisions they're making,
And why-
that we're making.
Right, yeah.
Well, if we put our way back hats on to before COVID, we actually started our YouTube process of having meetings online.
Yeah.
Just prior, and part of the goal was to be able to have meetings available so that people that weren't, here in Harbor Springs at the time, they were, at their winter house in Florida or something, would be able to, share comments and participate in meetings. So that was another, reason for that.
And I think based on the number of respondents that, would like us to continue, like the city to continue to do that, how specifically we do it is, but it's a goal, and then the objective might be to, but I do like the idea of it sort of an opt-in. Hey, you have to take the initiative to
Yeah.
send your
pretty
email
much.
address, and then you get the
Because-
meeting agendas
because
or
all
whatever,
those
not
assets
necessarily
Are
additional
there,
work.
but make it a little easier for them to get there, I guess.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Is that, any other comments or thoughts on question 12?
I'm assuming that's something you guys are saying you support, it should
Yes.
be in the master plan.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to survey 3, question 2. Longer summary, but some of the most important amenities. I think everybody's probably read this one. I'm just sort of reading these in case anybody's watching online. But it lists what people feel are most important, what they look for in a rental property: high-speed internet, walkable community, reputation of the community, services, green space, proximity to restaurants. The least important things were rooftop deck, access to public mass transportation, house of worship, fitness areas. So action recommendation was include language to create goals under section B that specify increasing access to certain amenities. One specific was to require any new multifamily development or buildings, build a sidewalk along the right of way if there isn't one existing. And seek a requirement that all new multifamily buildings have on-site laundry. That's pretty specific, but might be something that we would look at. So and then there's C, which rolls over on the next page. Consider allowing multifamily buildings outside of the CBD to be multi-use. I assume that means sort of like a coffee shop or something small, kind of more of a mixed-use, traditional neighborhood store type thing. So that's, we used to have a few more of those, along Lake Street. They've sort of gone out of closed for various reasons over the years. So encouraging some of those you walk to the store as opposed to driving to another one. That's probably something that we could look at too. So, any thoughts or comments, suggestions on that topic? We like the suggestions. Any additions to the suggestions or language change?
So in a master plan, do we get a specific to talk about on-site laundry facilities, or is
In a general term, yes.
Encourage, yeah, maybe not a requirement, but seek to encourage multifamily. We don't have a lot of applications for multifamily. We could see a few over the next few years, I imagine. So,
Over the years, there's been very few.
Yeah.
But you write the general statement,
Okay.
and then just such as, you know, in this,
And maybe it's more the encouragement of that it's, if you have a new multifamily building, that there are certain amenities that are within walking distance, or whether it's included in the building or making it a little easier maybe to have smaller commercial operations
Right.
in different parts of the town, but not just downtown.
And remember, the guiding words that we're gonna have in the master plan will carry over to the redraft of the zoning code. And so you're thinking about these not as regulations, but as things to consider when we redraft the code, the rules and regulations, that then an applicant or a developer or someone that's going to do a project will see and go, oh, that's a good idea, I hadn't thought of that. It's not necessarily a specific requirement, possibly, but it's an idea. We encourage you to do these sort of things. Like the stepping of roof lines in a waterfront district. Okay, it's encouraged, it wasn't mandated, but it was encouraged. But if you use it, you have the average height idea of a building that comes to. So I'm hearing that you like this idea and we need to knit it into our goals and objectives.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay?
Question 3 talks about where, survey 3, question 3, top of page 9, I believe. When considering where to live, respondents found that the following to be most important: safety, security, quality of life, physical condition of housing, characteristic of the neighborhood, walkability. That's again ties into the question 2. Bikeability. Other important characteristics include cost, availability of services from the city, road conditions, property tax levels. Lesser importance, public transport, public transit, childcare services. So probably speaks to the median age, potentially proximity to places of worship and proximity to work or school. So again, we're, as Mary Catherine's pointed out before, we're sort of limited to this, the sample size of our respondents, but those are the comments that were received. So the actions, does everybody have any thoughts on A, B, or C under actions? Including language encouraging funding, expanding of public safety training and resources.
I guess I just wonder, because the question didn't ask respondents to rank whether they thought these things were already here,
Yeah.
and that's why they were choosing here. They really asked them to rank them in importance. So, and I mean, I speak for myself, right? I feel like we're pretty safe. I don't know that there's anything that we need to do, because the question didn't ask, do people feel like this is a safe community? It asked, do you think that that's important? And
Right.
Sure, I would agree, yeah, it's important. Sort of similar with some of these other things, it's not that I have a problem with additional safety resources. I just wonder if that, because the question didn't ask people to say whether they thought that that was something that we needed to do. They just said that it was important in a community. I wonder if those are the right goals under here.
I think that makes sense. I sort of struggled with funding for expanding public safety training. I didn't know if that meant karate classes for the public in the parks, or if that meant better, more resources and training for the police department. So
Right.
I guess I was sort of lost on that one.
I can tell you my intention on that.
Sure.
It was more for the police department to handle certain things that, this, as I was doing this, was around the same time as the bomb threat came in.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm thinking about what aren't we prepared for? Like, one of Chief Knight's biggest concerns is we're a soft target.
Yeah.
We're a very safe community, but we don't have the ability to, ourselves deal with some sort of, mass kind of casualty situation. So bomb threat, which we hope is always unlikely. So my mind frame
Yes,
at the time
yeah.
when I was kind of doing this was, all right, I saw this response was safety is the most important thing. We said bomb threat, false.
Yeah.
Not false bomb threat, but still. Anyway, but I agree. I mean, what Mary Catherine is right. This doesn't ask where we're lacking, but it's just what are your values right now, most priority things, what's most important to you, and safety. Doesn't mean it's better with that at safety or security, it just means it's the most important thing
Right.
to them.
And kind of to that point, when I was, not to be, but things like with the farmer's market, I've always thought, geez, be great to have 2 fire trucks parked, so everybody can look at the fire trucks, but also at the end of Main Street at State would be, so maybe it's more, and Chief Knight, if he probably has a lot of ideas, so maybe it's more a matter of not public safety training so much as planning and, understanding what those plans are. And again, it's just a goal in the master plan, and it gives maybe city council down the road, if they're doing their expenditure budget, or the budget, and then the cost projection that we were looking at, so.
Well, and as you just say, everyone's notions of safety has changed. Had you asked me, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, what was my biggest concern for the safety of my residents at Perry, a virus outbreak would not have been my answer to that question, so.
Been on your radar, would it?
No.
And the bomb threat, I was texting with one of our kids at school, and I said, how do you know what's going on? She goes, oh, we're looking at the camera in the bell tower. I'm like, so the whole school, the kids school knew what was going on. The parents were all like, how do you know where everybody is? So, maybe training for the parents would be good.
Well, should this one perhaps we focus just a little bit more along the lines of what we're talking about, preparation for more catastrophic events, the things that actually probably keep Kyle up at night.
Yeah.
And move some of the other stuff as far as
Maybe it's emergency
walkability
planning and
stuff
health
like
and
that.
safety.
A lot of this stuff I don't think is a concern. It's nice. Yes, we recognize it. We like it.
Emergency preparedness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's layer, just an emergency preparedness, emergency response plan.
And that could be
Yeah.
weather, that could be
Right.
Oh, it could be a lot of
the
things.
100-year flood.
But that maybe
We
this is
got
what
that
this is
under
about.
Well, and another
We're good
part,
on that one.
one of the things, for example, that COVID brought up, when it first hit was, we didn't know what was going on. One of the things that we did was, made sure that the school had, utilizing sharing resources, like did they have enough propane or gas in case we need to run our backup generators for the city, keep the city going. So we were like coordinating all these things because we didn't know how long this was going to last, what kind of where it would lead to. Worst, back in March, it was like worst case scenario, apocalypse is coming. What do you do? So do we have enough resources? So we weren't prepared for this either. Good thing it didn't have the impact on infrastructure that some people were saying it was going to
Sure.
have, but
Power
if it
plants.
did, we would have been, Anyway, so that's
So
emergency response.
Maybe more emergency response would be. And then the other, it's kind of funny to jump from emergency response to, maybe these need to be broken out. It's sort of an odd. But again, develop standards by which to measure quality housing. That's going to be
This is one of those things where because of the zoning things that have happened, because of the development practices over the past 15 to 20 years, right? We really don't have very much housing that I would be concerned about the quality of the housing stock. You think of more in terms of rental programs, right? Doing rental inspections and things like that, which they do have a program for that in Petoskey, which is worth thinking about as, we think ahead, but within the city limits of Harbor Springs, I'm not sure the efficacy of this right now, just because there will be 4 places to go inspect. I'm not sure how many
Jeff,
places.
what do you think as far as we don't do condemnation, right? Like a couple.
We've got that one situation downtown that we've looked at. I've
not a lot.
gotten, it's not much.
I think it's probably more like what Mary Catherine said. There's I'm sorry to admit, I can't remember if it's later, but I think it talks about people reference, more the quality of the rentals and some of it's probably just, somebody's rented something for a long time and it's fallen off the back in terms of fire safety and accessibility and things like that. So maybe this goal, under goal 4, that's almost ties in later, almost ought to be moved more into the housing portion of it. I guess we're sort of.
Right, I think though, my thought here was just that when we're talking about the words, we're talking about appropriate balance. Again, what do we mean by quality? I think
Sure.
That's what we're.
Either change the word or define it, yeah.
We were saying these words like quaint, vibrant, appropriate, balance, what do these mean? And again, subjective, right? But at the same time, do we want to be more focused on, and that's what, based on these survey responses, it's like, all right, people want quality housing, but only 8% don't want, think it's an important issue. Well, when you took a survey, what do you think about quality housing versus what Mayor Catherine thinks of quality housing? I might think you have the basic access to what they need, the basic facilities, basic, needs to get to the community. Some people might be thinking about is there paint chipping, like people have different, perceptions. So I think that's why I was being a little more by quality.
And in terms of response, but again, I'm thinking about the question asked, do we have a problem with this in our community? Because I think, again, if you ask me, do I think quality of housing is important? Sure, absolutely. But there's also a way in which you could answer it as not being important because you don't think it's a problem in the community, not because you don't think the quality of housing is something that we should be paying attention to.
So it's not as big of a problem.
Yeah, I think
That's
I think the utilities, and we touched on a little bit of this earlier when we, in a different meeting, we were talking about, accessory living quarters and things like that. It probably would be really important, I think, for us. I think, Al, you brought in some information from your time with the sewer authority. It's just for us to have a better understanding. We can sit here and make plans all day long, but if it's not water in and stuff out, you don't have any options to affect those plans. So I think having us being more educated in a very, basic sense of, sort of, or the master plan,
Well, I think it's
talking
important,
about that more would be important.
Because, for example, if we're talking about, let's say, the goal, we come up with a plan that we increase density, right? We allow for more density in certain zoning districts. Does our sewer allow for it? Right now, we went above our capacity last year, so we had to take back sewer capacity and we rent it out, So we want to have that build-out plan to know, how much, and can we, alter that in the future? Is there a way to increase our sewer capacity? What's our limit? Same thing with electricity, same thing with water. So I think that's why, because I think, density is going to be an important topic, but you can't really think about that if we don't have the services from a city perspective to provide those services. So we have to be planned together. And I think that's where this is going.
And do you see this, or do people think, seems to me, like we only update the master plan heavily every 5 years. Would this be an exhibit that would be attached to the master plan that maybe you're probably not going to change your sewer capacity on an annual basis. It takes longer to affect that, but sort of do a current state of the Porta-John and make it an annex of the.
It's something that there's a utility department. Okay, it probably is, and I don't know for sure, a subcommittee of the city council that is part of the authority, okay, which reviews this every month, okay, and have an annual review of what in each community who participates in the authority, what do they contribute versus their capacity, okay. When I initially got the results from the DPW, I went, what in the tarnation is going on here? Because over the last 2 years, there's been this gigantic spike in our wastewater flow to the treatment plant. And that just what's going on that I don't know about? And in talking to Nick and talking to Jeff, well, water level's been up. I know that may be contributing to the infiltration of the sewer system because some elements of the system are older, higher groundwater that seeps into the sewage pipes. That might be part of it. It could be the homeowners who have wet basements are now pumping and not going into the storm system, but they're going into sanitary systems improperly. There's a lot of different factors in that. And so just because all of a sudden it spikes, we don't go out and expand the wastewater treatment plant because then we're talking about millions of dollars.
Right.
But it's something you keep on your radar. The authority has it in their radar. The plant capacity is fine because it was built big enough, to my knowledge, that it has the flexibility to handle those kinds of spikes, and other communities aren't using all of their capacity. And the financial elements of that's something other people handle other than me. Because there's got to be a balancing of treatment of what you're putting in the system. But it's something that we need to be cognizant of when we're doing our planning and talking about, well, let's increase our density by 30% so we get a more diversified housing stock here, as an example, okay, which is a great idea because there's probably a segment of the population that the city doesn't serve because of the market. It's not that they don't want to live here or people would like to have them live here. It's just that the market is such that it's just outrageously pricing of facilities. you know, a person working as a server at a restaurant in the summertime or year round can't afford a $350,000 old home that gets torn down by some and a bigger home, nicer home gets built up on it. It just doesn't happen.
Right, so in looking ahead to right-size the systems, it seems like, that's what we have to keep on our radar screen, right? Both for increasing internal density, but then also if there are areas adjacent to the city, because I know we serve some areas outside of the city limits. Are there areas adjacent to us that we think are going to require or need, or we might look to like to serve, because that would be a potential revenue stream?
Well, and I don't, you bring up a very good point. I'm not sure the city services those people, but their wastewater flow may flow through the city system. And thus, it
Well, some of them
impacts the
do. I mean, I know
capacity.
Perry
Right.
gets city water, and
Yeah.
we're outside the city limits,
Well,
but I don't have city sewer.
Right.
I would
yeah.
like
Lake Street
to.
doesn't
We,
either.
That would
our
be really
water goes
nice.
out definitely more than our sewer. And another thing is, I don't think this was not just about, in my mind, just about density. I'm thinking about changing technology, for example, for electricity, right? In 10 years, imagine maybe 20% of the stock will be electric cars. Now all these homes are gonna have their cars charging in their home. So now we have to plan for, all right, how much more money do we have to spend to buy, purchase electricity from the grid? Or does that mean we start building our own, power, that we're, more solar panels? I mean, there's all kinds
We
of.
put windmills on the bluff. Did I say that out loud?
that.
Well, I would
That would be
imagine
really
that
dynamic.
electricity usage is already spiked
Yeah.
with all of the connected things that people are running out of their homes these days.
Well, exactly, so like this kind of plan is, for the master plan, we don't need to get the specifics, but I think we need to have an understanding that, the city utilities might only have, the city staff and utility that we run might only have so much capacity in a short time frame to handle all this, and we need to plan ourselves separately from the master plan, for electricity planning, water planning, sewer planning, the roads, like obviously roads are set, but, we need a plan for those, have plans for those, and, right now we kind of do it as like a few year basis.
So you don't see this necessarily being an exhibit B or something attached to the master plan? It's really just more saying of what the build out would look like, or the build out would be a separate project done by?
It'd be a separate project, but it's really just be aware.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not gonna do utility planning.
Sure.
Or roads or sewer, water, electricity, snow plowing, things like that. That's a different department in the city. But it's a plan that is comprehensive, that city council be aware, manager, staff be aware. When we are talking about doing sewer planning and water planning, we need to think about the ramifications of that in association with the suggestions in the master plan.
So the master plan, the build out plan wouldn't be a part of it would be a goal of the master plan, and then it would be a plan in and of itself. It would be updated on a much more frequent basis potentially than the master plan. Okay,
Yes,
that makes
it's
sense.
not an attachment to the master plan, but rather it's a plan that's over here that the two need to work together,
Does that make sense?
okay?
Yes, David?
Hey, Larry, is that spike happening seasonally? Is that spike you're talking about affecting the sewer, is it a seasonal, did you notice if it's a seasonal thing?
I didn't get into it that deeply. It was just annual flows that
I
maybe.
can answer a little bit, we normally have increase seasonally anyway, but this was exacerbated all year long as opposed to just seasonally, so
Right.
the amount of increased flow was not just due to the seasonal.
That seems almost a top part of one.
Yeah, water table.
Well, last year we did have, some more residents coming earlier
Sure.
up north because of COVID, and some staying longer, some didn't come up, but, it's.
Well, and you get, these families that come up here that are from the city that are a bunch of mad flushers, and, I mean, it's almost like in your, I don't know if you put in the zoning or something, but to also instill with the utilities, to instill more low flow type, water,
Yes.
whether it's washers and dryers or sinks or low volume toilets.
I think a lot of that's in
That
the
should go
building
into any new
codes now.
construction,
Yeah.
especially multi-use.
I think a lot of that's in building codes now too. For that.
It is.
Okay.
And plus, we have a lot more people living in the homes more of the time now with short-term rentals.
Right.
Yeah, the shoulder months are more, much higher occupancy.
That's right, we have, yes, occupancy is higher.
Is that, everybody happy with that, then being a encouragement that a standalone utility and build out, utility and services build out plan be done by the city? Okay. Question 4.
Just repeat.
Got a repeat,
Yeah.
Kind of a repeat.
Okay. And then question 5, twice as many respondents believe that rental homes are in poor condition compared to non-rentals. 4 times as many respondents believe that non-rentals are in excellent shape. Consider the need for compiling an inventory of existing rental properties. I assume that would be both short and long term. I think this survey question really was more towards a long-term rental. That's, if I remember,
I mean, I would have made that assumption, but you don't know how someone would.
yeah, I think both, anyway, that's, okay, so it didn't specify short or
It
long.
may have, but-
Yeah. Create stricter regulations for landlords to comply with general maintenance of rental properties. Consider the need for creation of a landlord registry. We do have a short-term landlord registry or by property, I guess, which by default is the landlord. I guess we don't probably have that as much for long-term.
Well, we're compiling a database for the short-term rental stuff, so we've got that, but probably some type of a database or something for the long-term ones. And we may have that in our utility billing system. Tina might already be, to some extent, keeping track of.
Isn't it right now, back when I had a rental house, long-term, the utilities stayed in the homeowner's name because of if a bill racked up and then the tenant left, having somebody who was collectible or just able to locate. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but
I have to double check.
I
For a long
think
time.
you can arrange it either way.
you can still, okay.
I was gonna say, because you have to put down a deposit, like,
Okay.
everyone at Hillside, that's all their
It's
own
legit,
names.
okay, so that may have changed, which makes sense.
Generally speaking, on this question 5, do you feel there's housing in the city that really falls below acceptable or right there on the cusp of not being that good in the city?
I've been in a lot of houses in town, and I guess I've been, not 10 years ago, I was always surprised sometimes with what you actually would see.
What you
In
find.
terms of just quality of the house, not how it was kept, not just, and that was mainly out of just the age of the structure. There's only so much you can do for so long with a house that was built relatively lightly in, 100 years ago. But I think in general, in the city limits, I don't see as many of those. Many of those are just totally expired and aren't. I always joke, I've lived in 2 places that have already been torn down in town, and I think in a few more years there'll be 4, so.
And I think there's 2 different perspectives to this question. One is, are we doing, something like this is a goal, are we doing it because we want to protect the interests of the renters who are living there and make sure that they have quality, facilities and services, or are we doing it because of the aesthetics of the people who are looking outside, they don't like the way it looks? I mean, so there's 2 different things, me personally, I'm always more in favor of are the people that live there, are they safe, are they, et cetera, but who knows what people are answering this question, they might have been there's missing shingles on the roof, there's poor condition, so it's kind of subjective, but I mean, this is something like Larry was saying that amounts to, that we need to focus on.
I guess, there's a lot of tools out there that the city could employ with housing code enforcement. Okay. And we really don't do much today because there isn't much of a need. So the root of my question is this a problem big enough that we need to focus on this and make it a priority goal and objectives in the master plan? Or is it something that we should try to find some mid-level range way of making sure we don't have housing quality problems for the occupants?
I say it doesn't rise to the level it should be in the master plan. I'm thinking I don't think the city should get involved with inventorying rentals. That changes so fast about what's rented and, what's not rented and who's living in it. I don't think we could keep up. And I think the market can also have an effect on the quality. If your house is a dump, you're not going to be able to rent it.
Right now,
They rent it for
I
as
don't
much.
think that's true. I think right
You don't
now
think-
you could probably rent a hovel in the ground
Yeah.
to somebody, but I think you're right. I don't think there is enough in Harbor right now for this to rise, and with all of the other priorities.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think it's really pretty well covered in the, I mean, the blight ordinance is there. I mean, you don't have a flood of complaints about, I'm sure you get the occasional, hey, the grass is too long and there's been a car in the drive, but it isn't a huge issue, I guess.
We don't have pockets of, if you will, using old term slums
No,
in the city. I've driven every single city street at least once a year, just so I keep track of what's going on mentally. And I can't say I've ever seen a house that like, what happened to that? Okay, yeah, anywhere from Layton Park to out west to east side of Lake Street, and everybody seems to, generally speaking, keep up their house and property really well.
I think it would be
Now,
more
that's
like,
not from the inside perspective. I have no idea what's going on the inside, but physically on the outside.
I agree with not necessarily doing a registry for long-term rentals. Short-term, I think it's necessary because of the different, impacts that those tend to have. But I think a long-term rental, quite often, the long-term renter has lived there longer than the neighbors that own next door. So I think that's probably just their own business.
Six.
Six.
Thank you.
2/3 of respondents believe that quality affordable housing is important for people making decisions on whether or not to work in Harbor Springs. That makes sense. Consider defining. It's hard to define affordable housing. So utilize terminology that is truly reflective of the type of housing that the city can and should pursue.
So it's gonna take some work.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
A lot of people are working on.
Yeah.
In the region.
I think for the master plan, I mean, my gut is to kind of go with what Bill said, is you try to encourage that, the people that are in the know to pursue those goals, and it's going to change. Obviously we're at a heightened point where that's pretty difficult to accomplish, but it certainly should be a goal to.
And I think part of this goes to the presentation we had and the information we received on that topic of the missing middle. Okay, I think this fits into that. Now, from the survey that the people responded to, that's not a huge priority, but I know it's something that I can't think of her name and who she works with, the housing group here in North.
Yeah.
Little Traverse Bay Housing Partnership, and her name was Emily Myers.
Yes, thank you. And when you went through all that information, because of the size of Harbor Springs and the market that's here, the impact they're looking to have that Harbor Springs sort of achieve is real low. We're not talking about another 100 dwelling units or something. I think it would go like 10 units that would be this kind of meet this need of missing middle is all they're looking for the city. So it's an item I think that's important, but it's an item that's not real important, but unless you're in that category, okay, it's really important. But at the same time, I think we've addressed the issue in the plan, and as we're reviewing the zoning code, we keep that in mind as to how we can work elements to provide opportunities for someone who wants to, is to develop a piece of property and address this need.
I think that's a good way to have a goal. I mean, we had the most recent attempt I can think of sort of employee housing. There's certainly, there is a it's called, boarding house is the current word that it falls under. And that just is probably, I think maybe the goal is to update the language of the zoning code to sort of, I guess, destigmatize employee housing or affordable housing. I think that maybe, and we probably aren't going to come up with necessarily the right words for people to use, but the missing middle, things like that, I think make sense, and it is right now. And I think part of the missing middle presentation was really updating your zoning code, whether it's just sort of destigmatizing employee housing and also unit dwelling minimums, right now I think are pretty big. So, I think those things should be encouraged by this goal and those, and
Well, what I was getting at again was this, this definition, we said, missing middle, affordable housing, but what are our goals? Like, okay, we can say that, but when someone's reading that, well, what does that mean? And we need to set, I guess, more specific goals, not necessarily 10 houses, but something like what we're trying to aim for. Like, this is what we mean when we say we want to increase, we want to be able to keep make this much money. I don't know what the definition, how we define it, but we want to narrow our scope down, I think, a little bit, so we just don't say increase affordable housing, and, all right, great, what does that mean? How are we gonna work to that?
and I think putting,
Typically in defining affordable housing, it's no more than 30% of your income should be going towards your fixed housing costs, whatever those are, whether that's rent or mortgage. In Emmett County, the average median income is $60,000, which means your house price should be $180,000 or less. Where in Emmett County can you buy a house that's $180,000? Not a lot of
So
places.
maybe touching on some of those.
So, you can include some of that information. It shifts, but it hasn't shifted a lot over the
30% is
past.
better than saying income, it's just.
It is, because really affordable housing is what can you afford, right? It's housing that you can afford. When we talk about affordable housing, I think people think subsidized housing, they think low income housing rather than thinking about housing for people who are working and living in our community.
Yeah.
You think about who in our community also makes $60,000 a year. That's people who work at the hospital. Those are paraprofessionals. Those are people who work at the schools. I can get on a tear. The Harbor Springs City Council did just help approve some funding to go towards the Little Traverse Bay Housing Partnership and a staff position that will help work on a lot of these issues. There are a whole host of tools that planning commissions and units of government have. Petoskey is looking at a deed restriction program. I think they're talking about that this week at their planning commission meeting. And beyond zoning, then there are other things that the city can be looking at in terms of either assets that they own, property that they have, or property that's adjacent, or in partnership with other places, tax credits. There's a whole host of planning tools that units of government have. So I think, as long as, to Victor's point, I think we just have to talk about that this is a goal, that we think it's important, without getting too much in the weeds in it, because that'll change dramatically. But also, I think the other point is that we need to be working and thinking regionally, because yes, there are only certain things that the city of Harbor Springs can do, but if they are in conjunction with looking at what other communities are doing, that will help move this effort forward. And I cannot stress enough how much this is just a basic economic development principle. If we don't have housing for people who live and work here, we're dead as a community, whether we are a resort community or not. So, soapbox.
So you don't want it to be a goal, then you're okay if we leave it.
And that may come, part of the solution, not all of it, part of the solution is that we have a huge influx of summer workers here. Okay, and some of the biggest employers really have their own summer housing programs. Okay, and some of our rules that we have on the books today, zoning rules, prohibit them from expanding that facility where they've always been. Like Little Harbor Club in their facility, that Jeff and I have talked to them, and we've racked our brain as to how can we help them expand and improve the facility they have over on across from the park.
Yeah.
The beach. Yes.
Yeah.
To that Bay Street. Yeah.
Beach view.
Yes.
So,
But
Delta House.
Part of that solution could be, there's a lot of empty space in the summertime that people could rent out a space. Okay, whether it be an older guest quarters that is no longer needed as a guest quarters, but it can be rented, but we don't allow that. There could be a lot of little things like that.
Maybe that's
We
part
could
of this.
use the opportunities.
Maybe that's an objective under the goal of, affordable housing, and I think you could even use, what is traditionally considered affordable housing as 30% of your,
Right.
income, and maybe that's under the actions is to review and amend the zoning code to be less prohibitive for,
Yes.
a balanced use of, short-term or seasonal housing.
Seasonal rental, yes.
Yeah, so I think, and the big key component to that, I think everything you'll find, and we all see everywhere is that but there has to be the balance with short-term rental because that certainly is a more profitable use for a single family home than it is to be employee housing. So there's that the more rentals you create, you have to make sure you're creating them in such a way that they are automatically put into the short-term rental pool, so.
And then we saw what happens when somebody wants to create a rooming house.
Yeah.
In the city over on State Street that, just blew up on us.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's a perfect situation.
It has been a rooming house for 45 years,
But if the neighborhood just,
I think a lot of it is, again, updating the language in the zoning codes. Maybe that specifically is an objective, is to sort of.
And maybe when looking at the future land use map, we find some areas in town that we can do something with on that to encourage locationally.
I think the wording that we're gonna have to really work hard on the wording for this objective for whatever type of housing options we want to encourage. And it's gonna be probably the most important thing that we do. And it's gonna be referenced in this plan continuously as the community discusses what do we want to accept and what don't we want to accept in terms of different housing. So, we're gonna have to get to it at some point soon to phrase it just perfectly. And I think we can get some help from the regional organizations about how to do that and what the best practices are. So I don't know for our purposes tonight.
Move on.
I think move on and just know that we got some serious work to do on this.
This is a pretty
Yeah, because the next question, survey 3+7, really talks about, again, there's summarize, and if you want me, I can start.
Yeah, no, go right ahead.
Yeah, so really it's about the accessory living quarters, right? Examining zoning districts to ensure types of housing are located in appropriate neighborhoods and ensure that single family homes have accessory structures that can house family members. And whether or not we want to allow them to house more than family members is the other question, right? That's what we're just talking about. I think that was something that we were all, that we should look into, is accessory structures, how to use them.
And I think that's one that we have, the good, we will have an abundance of public input on that topic, which will be really helpful because we are, people here don't need to be the ones deciding on how.
Right, but I think for that question in particular, but also for many of these other questions, I think we've got to figure out some other ways to get different public input and be very targeted in who we are asking these kinds of questions. Because, the audience, who you ask and the way you ask is really going to drive the answer to the question. And quite honestly, I think one of some of the people we should be asking these questions to are the high school students. They're the ones who are going to come back here and live. Hopefully, Nukmuk students, what do they want our community to look like? Because housing isn't something that turns on a dime. It's not something that you adjust, from 6 months now, 12 months down the road. It's something you have to be looking at long term. Anyway, okay.
The next question talked about STRs, and majority of people wanted to limit STRs. So, something do we want to consider having an objective limiting the number of short-term rentals?
I think examining the numbers. I don't know that limiting. Again, I think that's a better way to say. Odds are we probably don't feel like we need necessarily more, but that may change in 25 years. So I think managing or examining is a better term than limiting. And it doesn't necessarily say we're going to go one way or the other, but it just says we need to really pay attention to it because it impacts all the things we talked about for the last half an hour. So
That can change from council to council.
Yep.
Yeah, so every year it would change.
Yeah.
So again, this survey for question 5, it talks again to, the dichotomy here. We got 2/3 of the respondents saying they don't want to see more duplexes, large single family homes on large lots, rental apartments, rental assisted apartments, high density housing, and deed restricted housing, while most respondents wanted more single family homes.
And I think that is a lot goes towards how the question was asked and those terms. Let's be honest, the terminology of duplex, triplex, what we envision when you say that word is not, there's several of those around that you walk by and think it's a perfectly fine home and you don't understand how it's configured.
Well,
so I think that maybe goes to the same goal before of just sort of updating, and if it's the housing board that could help us sort of modernize our terminology. I think a lot of it is how, with example, you can show that a duplex, triplex is not necessarily a, what is that, mansard roof? I mean, like that sort of, I always picture, you know, the dorms at Albion College, which are hideous. I mean, so I think it's just, we have to update our terminology, and that can be maybe an objective as to.
Well, and then
The
one
action.
key thing that I could pull out here for sure was that item A under the action was consider adjusting minimum lot and home size requirements in residential districts to allow for smaller homes on smaller lots. That's the one thing I gathered for sure that people want, you know, out of this. So I think that's pretty.
I've had, well, not necessarily here, but other places, I've had a lot of people call me regarding, can I put a tiny home
Mm-hmm.
on my lot? And, well, define that for me, please. Okay, what do you think is tiny? What do I think is tiny? It might be two different things. They said, oh, about 400 or 500 square feet. I went, well, our minimum standard right now is 960.
Yeah.
Oh, but if you build a 960, you'd be just fine. That's pretty small. Well, okay, but I was thinking of something really small. All right, well, that's what we have as a rule.
And I think that's the kind of thing we need to look at. And I mean, I looked for somebody who was trying to do that, and this is a year or two ago, and looked at every district in the surrounding townships. I think the smallest one I found was oddly, might have been agricultural or something. And you could do in Little Traverse Township, 609 square feet. And I looked for how many parcels were zoned that, and they were like, you know, so that's something that is area regional, not just city of Harbor. You have to get the lot minimums and square footage minimums down to what people can and want to build now.
Is the idea of a tiny home something you as planning commissioners think that, well, we should research that so we know what we're talking about?
I think it's sort of you know, I don't know that it's become sort of synonymous with 120 square feet, and it's on the bed of a you know, they build them on tree, which is nothing wrong, but I think it may not, again, it's a word that in 10 years we may look at it, and that may be the triplex of 2040, where people just go, tiny houses, those all rolled away.
Right.
So I think just reduce, you know,
Just
something that
smaller-
objective
smaller
to me
house
would be, you know, modernizing the minimum standards or something.
Yeah, I think tiny homes does have a connotation to it. And depending on where your view is, you have a different opinion. But, you know, housing can be done very well under 900 square feet.
Right.
You know, for some people, I think around 600 is a really nice number. I've seen some really nice things designed around 600 square feet. You get down around 400, it starts getting really, really tight. And that comes down to lifestyle decisions, I think. But 600 is a very nice number. I've seen a lot of very nice plans at 600 square feet for a single person or a couple.
Yeah.
They work really well. They're very successful. Very successful.
I actually lived in 609 square feet and 411, and he's exactly right. There's a diminishing return, yeah. They're both still standing in the city of Harbor, but it won't be for much longer.
All right, well, going on here, this next question 7, again, was, you know, I don't know how important it's gonna be for based on what we just talked about, you know, 55% of residents want to see more upkeep and maintenance of residential properties. I think, based on our conversation, my action items are, you know, something we're not gonna do here, consider housing inventory, housing condition, just not right now, it's not something that's needed right now, so.
Low priority.
Question 5 is question 4, you know, just over half of residents don't want the city to acquire more land for park purposes. You know, and that's not a, you know, clear majority, but, this is one of those things where we have a lot of contradiction. We want more parks and recreation stuff, but we don't want you to spend more money on land. So, I mean, that's necessarily a conflict, but redirect the focus of parks programs to improving our existing public spaces rather than expanding parks, like it's acquiring land.
Yep.
I mean, we did try to go for that one piece down there, but, you know, is it worth the effort, or should we just focus on improving what we have?
I think a lot of the, comments I got from around town, and I think some of the other questions looking at the surveys as a whole, it really was more, not that we don't like the parks, we just want to do more with the parks we have first. It's sort of the better utilization of what they were. So I agree with that objective.
Question 2 of survey 6. These are recreation activities, and, you know, we do talk a lot about parks and recreation in our master plan, and that's a question of just a general philosophical question. Do we want to focus that much in our master plan on parks and rec, or maybe encourage a separate, but we do have this old master parks plan from the nineties, and, you know, my goal with the parks director is to have them have a master plan for parks and rec, and maybe, there's something to think about when we go forward.
I think that's actually probably a good idea, is to state that it's important, it's a goal,
Yeah.
and then reference that parks plan, because then that would require that parks plan be updated more.
And I personally, this is my own area, I don't know if you've done a lot more with plans, but I personally think that our focus on parks should be, you know, the land use aspect of, you know, and the types of activities can happen there, but not necessarily like, all right, we want, exactly, we're not gonna do park plan, but you know what, we wanna have open green space, we wanna have recreation areas or something, more than just like, all right, swimming lessons on Tuesday at this one or something like that, but these questions, you have these few ones are based on that, so I'll just go through them very quickly. These are what people are interested in: swimming, hiking, dog walking, bicycling, snowshoeing, basically everything. So include goals that, again, improving city parks and facilities, allowing those increased opportunities, something general like that, you know.
Should we reference specifically the parks plan and move a lot of this into the park? Just, I mean, we were talking initially about shortening this document. That seems like a great opportunity to state it as a goal, give some objectives, but move out a lot of this, you know, into that parks plan
I think
and
that's
shorten the master.
And the other element, real quickly, is every 5 years, that plan, the parks plan needs to be updated for being eligible for state funding.
Right.
So you have to have that, and it has to be a separate
And
document.
maybe that's an objective of the master plan, is to ensure that the parks plan is current and it can apply for as many, you know, therefore.
The only thing I might
I like that.
think to add in there is some reference to making, and I haven't worked through this totally in my head, is access, like to ensuring that there is good access to those parks and recreational facilities. And like, you know, I think about, you know, sidewalks, which we had that discussion before, but you know, can you easily get to the park and access the park and use the park, or use whatever recreational facilities are available?
I think that's a master plan.
Yes, I think that is a master plan piece.
Absolutely, I agree. The question 5, again, this is, you know, maybe not something we want to get specific in this plan, was about, you know, the city coordinating with area entities. It's kind of already a current goal, you know, do we expand more on that? I think just this action item is about consider adding language for the highly specific recreational grant opportunities. That can be just moved to the park.
I think
We just focus on collaborating with area entities as we really do. Question 6, parks and recreation initiatives, you know, they want to see, you know, more musical performances, concerts, blah, blah, not blah, blah, but again, this goes into, again, programming, you know, so can be moved toward the section. However, we did get this discussion whether the tennis courts should be relocated or whether the city should collaborate with the school. Again, you know, one of the big things when we removed those tennis courts was a huge thing with the council was, all right, we're gonna put new ones somewhere. I mean, does the master plan want to focus on specific, you know, we're gonna have tennis courts here, pickleball courts here, or again, move that to the,
I think
that's what I heard.
the one that, and I don't know if you're to it yet, but, sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but it was B under about the historical society.
Right.
I guess that was the one. That's master plan, not parks and rec
Right.
plan. So does that make sense to have that?
Yeah, we should probably mention that we should collaborate or work with them. I mean, we are working with them on a lot of stuff now, with the Shea Park, with potentially the Blackbird, other things, so there's a lot of things going on with them, so I think that's important. All right, survey 7, question 3, again, Parks and Recs, let's go through it. Just talking about how they want to see more money from the townships
Good luck.
but really what happens here, I think, for me, the main focus is that a lot of the users of our parks are not city users, they're from the surrounding townships, and we gotta be cognizant of that in our planning purposes, that, hey, you know, this is not, even though it is for our city, but this is being used by a lot of different people, they should be involved. I mean, they should be contributing to this in any way possible, and whether it's through giving them separate fees or, you know, asking them for more money, that might be a topic for the parks director and the plan, but something we need to be cognizant of us for planning purposes, that there's are users of our town and our systems and our facilities that are well beyond the numbers that live here, and those are those surrounding townships and visitors in the summertime. So we gotta be cognizant of that when we set up, when we plan for our parks and our green spaces, that yes, we wanna keep our community in mind, but we also have to keep in mind that 100 kids that are using the beach, maybe only 20 of them live in the city, they might live outside, so who are we building these facilities for? And it seems to be our city as well as the general area at large.
Which is the community.
Question 4, waterfront public spaces draw the most visitors. So this is just what they feel. And basically, talking about focusing on the waterfront parks, that those are our gems for attracting people. I don't know if we want to keep that in our master plan or not.
I think more kind of along the lines of where we've been going with a lot of this is not that it isn't to necessarily draw visitors from outside the area, but really to serve first and foremost. And I figure, West Traverse, Little Traverse, any township in the school district is part of the community, as David said. So it's more, first and foremost, make sure that the parks have the things that the residents, both short-term, part-time and full-time residents, whether you're a taxpayer or a renter, want to use and do, and make sure there's some availability to them, as best we can. You can't determine preference, but just, I guess it's maybe, I don't necessarily think that we need to make it under question 4, draw the most visitors from outside. I guess they'll naturally draw the visitors from outside the area. I just want to focus on the people who are here as residents, full-time and part-time, first and foremost, whether it's the parks or anything that the city does. I think if we make it a great place to live, people always want to visit. If you try to become a great place to visit, and it's not necessarily a great place to live. Those two aren't always the same thing. So.
Good point. Let's move on quickly here with survey question 3. Now this translates, I think, more into land, how we're using our land now. So the respondents ranked what their 3 top economic development priorities should be. 1 was recreation tourism, 2 was cultural facilities and activities, and 3 was educational facilities and programs. Ranked at the bottom was manufacturing and construction on this list. And obviously maybe that's already a result of how the town's already, shaped, but clearly we don't have many manufacturing and anything like that in the limits. We have Franklin Park that's just outside of the city limits. So I guess my goal item was goal 8 mentions recreation theme, but there are no objectives related to recreation and how it interplays with economic development aspect of the city. Is that something that we want to consider, how language about how recreation tourism impacts the economy? The second one there was the need for more cultural facilities. And the third one there was attracting more vocational or non-traditional education programs to the city or the area. That's coming where people feel educational facilities and programs are very important for our economy. I don't see us shifting to manufacturing. I don't see us shifting to industrial. So I see those as our 3 economic bases, regardless of. So
I think it might be, we've used the word balance a lot, whether it's the trees and the view or the other things in rentals, short-term, long-term. But I think if we can, seek to find a balance between what we, what is the industry here, which is a great place to live and visit and spend time, and hopefully the time is more than an afternoon or a day or 2, and those, you have to have a certain element of that, because that's how everybody decides to live here, is they visited once or they were born here. But so I think, but finding a balance between recognizing and acknowledging that our industry really is recreation and tourism, but balancing that with the needs and the interest of residents, both part and full time. So,
maybe there's another way to get to the heart of this, and that maybe it's less about we specify what kind of industries we want to attract, because we're really going to have very little ability to do that. Maybe we just talk about the desire for more full-time, year-round jobs, and industries or businesses that can produce that. We ought to seek out. You can balance that with environmental impact. So maybe we don't want to manufacture. Not that we have room anyway, but I'm thinking maybe full-time, year-round jobs would be
And that was going back to the
I think-
surveys we did, I don't know. I can't believe I forget the name, but it was really that catchphrase coming out of that was a year-round sustainable economy, which sort of is the jobs. And I'm sorry, I draw a blank on what that survey was.
You know, when you think about it, our economy here is our resources. And the maintenance of those resources and the attractiveness of the community is our economy. That draws people here. We manufacture a environment downtown that employs people. And with the advent of short-term rentals, if you will, you know, the good side of that is it's bringing more people to this community on a year-round basis. Because one of the shortcomings we have in this region, in Harbor Springs specifically, is where can I stay for the weekend? Where can I spend a couple of days? We haven't had that up to short-term rentals. We used to have an old hotel, a couple of them in town, that were not the best quality as I understood it.
Functionally obsolete.
Either one of them, but as time went on, you know, they became very run down. But our economy is our resources here. I mean, if we didn't have the bay, okay, we probably wouldn't be here. Okay, and if we didn't help keep it clean, okay, it would basically diminish in value our economy, because they're all tied together with the beauty, the trees, the clean water, the access to the waterfront. All of those things help create jobs in this town. That is our economy. It's not making widgets. It's not making boats. It's not manufacturing high-tech stuff. Okay, and the idea of promoting full-time jobs is great. And just to continue to maintain our resources is so valuable here. So valuable that keeps this economy going. Yeah, COVID hurt us bad because people couldn't come. But we weren't manufacturing anything. That hurt this economy a lot. But we're coming out of that. It was a temporary thing, thank goodness. And hopefully this summer will be a much better summer than last summer here. So
I think it hurt those businesses that rely on tourism
yes,
and some of the seasonal people, but it didn't slow down construction.
no, we didn't.
Those guys are way over the top, and they sold more boats at boat shops
No, yeah,
than they have for many years.
really.
And the ski areas did well. So we can't think of the economy as only this downtown. The economy, especially construction, in my mind, because it pays their employees well.
Yes.
That's an industrial thing, that's a manufacturing thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I hate to see it dump to the bottom and disregarded, because those guys employ more people than probably the downtown does.
So, oh, yes.
And, you know, the next biggest employer would be the hospital in the region.
Yes, regional.
So I can't buy that we got hit, the economy up here got hit so hard by COVID. The downtown did.
Downtown, but not the overall.
But the overall economy, some of these guys have really made a lot of money in this COVID economy. They're doing better than they ever did before.
I think Al makes an interesting point, because if you think about who didn't come this year, potentially were at least initially were non-residents, whether they're short-term or full-time or part-time. And we're talking to at least one of the bartenders in town, because I talked to the bartenders in town, and they said once they opened up again, they had the best fall they've ever, the summer was strong, and it just stayed busy. And those were some short-term rental, but a lot of people that just stayed here. They came early and they stayed late. And so I guess it's interesting, we sort of took out what sometimes, not just us, but a lot of towns focus on, which is sort of, people on the streets, day trips, and we had fewer day trips in this, from what I understand, this, don't want to speak for them, but the ski hills had some of their best, if not the best season, one of the best seasons they've ever had. They pre-sold more season passes than they ever had. So I think people who live here, reside here on a seasonal or full-time basis, we're here more, and those are the people we want. If we could repeat, frankly, that over and over again, that's who we ought to focus on.
Here's where I was getting with this, and this is why I see Bill's point of, attract more full-time, year-round residents. I think what we're trying to do with this question, though, we're looping it back to the master plan, is we're talking about planning for the land use of our community. And if we just say we want more full-time jobs, all right, that doesn't say anything about how we want our economy to look like to impact on our land use. So that means do you want an industry downtown? Do you want to see a manufacturing thing downtown? And I think people would probably say no. So I think we're trying to look at, what is our focus on our economy, so we know what kind of, how we can plan our land use for the city. We want to know where, we want to emphasize maybe more cultural facilities, recreation, tourist things, and educational things, because that's what the people want, and that's what the people think. Or maybe we look at what we're lacking and say, you know what, maybe that's what people think is important, but we need to focus on what we're lacking.
I think I'd move the tourist in terms of day trip. And, we all visit places, and that's great, but as far as, I think what we focus on is what Bill said and what Al said, and in terms of, we have to, if we're a nice place to live, we'll be a great place to visit. Let's not focus on attracting visitors. Let's focus on attracting people who want, and part of that is going to be affordable housing. Part of that's going to be a full-time job. Part of that's going to be access to the park. So I think the one thing that we probably don't talk about enough in the master plan are, cultural spaces where, what can you have at this high school, you have the performing arts, and a few things, but we don't have a lot of that. So that's something we could that's a land use that's kind of easy to think about. And those also provide jobs potentially. And so I think that for the sake of tonight, I think the AB and I think vocational and recreational or non-traditional educational programs, that's probably the hardest one to define, but I think adding Bill's language to that, either make it a C or add it to B, but long-term and meaningful employment is a.
There's another side to that too, as far as some people who are coming here. It's happening across the country now with COVID. Everybody realized they don't have to work in their physical places anymore.
Right.
And they're going all over the country working. And I have people who work for me now, and they're not within 500 miles of here. And people are finding special places to go where they have their job. It's this, and that's all they need, but they want to go to nice places. And so if we invest more in some of these other things that you're speaking of, performance venues and things like that, that makes us more attractive to these people. They're here living, they're here spending money, contributing to the community, but they're not working downtown. They're not out on construction sites. It's a different group of people. Now, there's always been some of those people who could do that, but now many, many, many more are.
Which speaks to some infrastructure things to be thinking about that I think are master plan things like broadband access and some other things which we really haven't addressed as part of this master plan. But I also think we need to think about updating, as long as we're updating our definitions and our thoughts about housing and some other things, updating, when you talk about manufacturing, people think smokestacks, and that's not all manufacturing. That's not even like the biggest part of it anymore. If somebody wanted to come set up a little shop to build custom paddle boards downtown, do you think that would be a problem? No, that would be great. How cool would that be to be able to stop in and watch somebody make something like that? That's manufacturing. And if our zoning doesn't allow that to happen, then we need to rethink how we think about certain kinds of uses of our property in certain areas. So
maybe it's enough to say that we should, the master plan goal should be to, and again, not knowing what the future is going to be, but we should tie in what Victor's been saying, which is these are really land use decisions, but the land use decisions should be made in such a way to encourage the things that you just said, and Al just said. So that way we kind of get off trying to define, industrially, you're exactly right. We all picture a black and white photograph and a sawmill. Well, we're not probably going to do that. But it's
brewing,
right, which would be, it's very difficult to do that closer in, within the city, as far, but so I
Then
think
we also
that.
gotta consider though, related to that though, back to the utility build out, right? You know, you're gonna have
Yep.
these kinds of manufacturing. What kind, can we do light industrial, light manufacturing? But we can't do heavy manufacturing because a brewery, think about how much water they would,
Right.
and wastewater, that's a lot.
And they
I'm not
don't,
saying it can't happen, I'm just saying it's a lot of.
yeah, I think that's a land, you know, have the land use be guided by the things we wanna, that we just sort of talked about and what the public will bring, hopefully when we get to that point too. So, is that,
Yeah, can I do a couple more here?
absolutely, you do all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Question 4, really, people were saying, they feel like laundromats and department stores are too far. And obviously laundromat is an issue, we don't have one in town right now, we need one, so. Department stores, and you know, they're split on that, right, you know, the community doesn't wanna see, a lot of people don't wanna see department stores in city limits. You know, my thing was, you know, maybe a staff or even a planning commission eventually would look at what do department stores have that people want and need? Is it lower prices? Is it just more, because we have a lot of shops downtown that are specialty clothing shops or higher end clothing shops. But I was here for some like regular, you know, some regular guys, like I just can't get boxers downtown. You know, I have to go to Tosca to get boxers, right? You know, it's just, you know, so what is it the department stores have that people want? It's not, they don't want a big,
Well, department
Macy's or
stores, I mean,
JCPenney.
if you ask the department stores, they're all going out of business. So, I mean, it's kind of an odd terminology. I mean, I think, you know, JCPenney left Petoskey after 100 and so, I mean, it's, but I think the dollar, you know, the Fairview Plaza has become sort of our
you know,
department stores in a niche with the IGA fairly close, and downtown because of, you know, you know, Cassidy's went out years ago as far as a hardware, so, but there's one uptown. I mean, it's, I think that department store, again, might be one of those sort of antiquated terms. It might just be sort of goods and services that are,
I think that's what it is if we're talking about attracting people, like, you know, within that affordable, right, you know, what's affordable to them, 30% rate. Well, if they can't afford the services or the goods that are in the city, then, you know, they might not choose to live here, you know, and that's something that I think we need to consider with planning. This is something
we should lower the taxes on commercial property. That would lower the prices of the goods and services sold. No? No? Okay.
Are you voting in this message?
Well, you know, that,
Let us stuff
the
the ballot
specialty
box.
shops have totally taken over from the Feathers and the Rosenthals that were sort of department stores
Sure.
on a smaller scale for
Yep.
the size of this community.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know how you could encourage someone to take that on, but, because they make too much money on the high-end stuff, you know?
And that's cyclical. I mean, you know, see, we had, you know, certain types of business, without being specific, have come in, sort of flourished, overpopulated, and then sort of fallen back to it. But it is very, very hard nationally to make, I mean, the general store is a, you know, unfortunately, a very rare thing to find anymore. They tend to be restoration hardware stores that sell really, really expensive nails, you know, so I mean, it's kind of hard to make that work.
I'll go on here really quickly. Question 7 was, we're talking about year-round work. So the goals, I just had emphasized the need to attract and retain businesses that are not just service related and maintain a year-round professional workforce. And Billy, you're talking about that essentially now. Devise ways to attract visitors to the city to ensure that the service sector job is not just temporary or seasonal. So essentially, in the winter season, you know, are they closing down winter and spring, or are people visiting downtown for those businesses that are in town? Those are 2 ways. You know, survey 9, question 2, people don't know or have never gone to Sneaky Beach or Washington Street access to waterfront area. You know, these are 2 public waterfront areas that people don't know about. You know, again, this could go to Parks and Rec, you know, promoting education, educating people about public waterfronts.
And I think managing, I mean, those are cool spots. They're obviously very limited in part. I mean, you have to manage how people get to them.
Like 3 spots, 4 spots at Sneaky Beach.
There's 0 parking at that one.
Yeah.
Well, and would most of the respondents know that that's what they're called? Because I gotta tell you, having grown up in and around this town, I go to places all the time. I have no idea what they're called. Somebody says, oh, on that street, and I'm like, where?
Well,
They're like, well, you know, you
everybody
go there
plays-
and you
yeah.
turn there and you turn there, and I'm like, oh, well, of course.
Of course.
I think that's a Parks and Rec
Yeah,
plan.
yeah, that's a good point. Let's shift that.
And with Sticky Beach, there are deed restrictions on that property that we don't want a lot of people.
Yeah, you're on the way to.
Yes,
They
you
don't
know,
go back to the original, to the adjacent property owners.
it can only be a street. It can't be a, I mean, it could be an access way, but that's it. You can't set up camp.
So it can't be a beach.
Survey 9, question 10 is kind of conflicts with an answer we got before, which was we don't want to see expanded space, but at Ford Park, the public, the respondents want to see us acquire more waterfront space next to Fort Park. Obviously, Fort Park has congestion issues, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that could be something for the parks.
Irish.
Yeah, we're about, exactly, so that's,
Yeah.
more seating, so that could something we can focus more on the parks planning. Question 11, we're kind of dealing with that right now, landscape at the Marina Park green space. So we kind of are forming that by our Marina Park committee, that's kind of taken care of, but.
Yeah. I think to, state it as a goal and objective, and that is probably the harbor master building and all that. I mean, that's, again, it's all being dealt with, but.
So we're dealing with that. Question 12. Just under 1/3 of respondents thinks the harbor master building should be torn down. Again, this is a more of a, this is a hotter issue. A majority, 55%, does not think the city should build a new harbor master building. Is that something we want to touch on in the master plan, or just say that to the harbor commission?
I think.
Yeah.
Right, because it's not land use, right?
Well, it could change, if it's relocated, it could change the way the park green space is used. That's
Usually what happens is those come to us for like the parking lot side.
Right.
And not, so I mean, yeah, we're not really that, but the master plan obviously recognized the importance of all those things. It's just the harbor master building, hopefully if whatever happens to it, happens and it won't happen again for 50
We
years.
acknowledge the park that's there and the uses that are there, but we're not gonna get into designing how it should be operated.
But should we,
Okay.
but should we say that we think it should be planned holistically? That the whole waterfront should be, that it should be viewed, both for the short term and the long term, and not just, sometimes it appears to be somewhat knee jerk and what happens there, like get rid of the tennis courts and things like that.
Well, I think that makes a good point. I mean, the things that, you're not likely to acquire a lot more waterfront adjacent to anything that the
No.
city really owns right now. So you almost have to plan, okay, if these services and amenities are at Fort Park, do we need them at the waterfront park, but we don't need them at the city beach? I mean, I think your holistically idea should be that the city, the master plan maybe says something to the effect that the city should manage its waterfront parks.
Well,
as
resources.
one
It's
build.
all the
Yeah.
resources,
Yeah,
but have.
It's really one amenity and you need to take
Yeah,
care of it
really,
as
well,
one
it's
piece.
just what Larry said a little bit ago about what our economy is,
Yeah,
and that's a big part of it. And it just seems at times, it's like these are looked at microscopically and not in a more broad vein.
and not even with, as all those waterfront parks sort of together as one.
Well, this is where my action item on the question 12 kind of is a more broader approach than just a harbor master building. So, objective C of a current master plan says it strives to prevent the construction or expansion of buildings. So, does this language also preclude relocation of buildings along the waterfront? This was also, some issue with the IBS case, right? So, we gotta really look at that language, I think, to say, is this what we mean? Do we mean construction or expansion? Does that mean the same thing as relocation?
I think taking out those specifics and just talking more about what Mark said and what we've talked about tonight, which is sort of the general theme of what we want to see, but not specific actions in a goal. I mean, it's too narrow to say, what if relocating a building is the smartest thing you could do and you just can't do it because it's discouraged, or the argument can be made that, so I think taking out construction, expansion of buildings, not that isn't, but I think it's more, speak more to what we want to see in the parks and in those areas that are owned by the public. I have a problem with getting too specific on anything that's going on private property, beyond what's already required by the waterfront district.
Well, if you take that out, though, then are we saying that we want to take out, loosen the restriction in our zoning code? Because right now we have zoning code restrictions on waterfront.
I think just say a general theme of what we want to do, but not say specifically, the movement or building or expansion. I think that gets too, that almost is what you'd be saying if you were going to get into how do you want to do the harbor master building? I don't know,
Well,
maybe expanding it, but making it flatter as opposed to two-story. I think that's more.
Could we go back to our balance language that we've been talking about before, that our goal is to see a balanced use, a balance of uses on the waterfront that doesn't overburden the waterfront in some way, which is the goal, right, of that language about not building or expanding or whatever new buildings. So get at what we want, which is that we want our waterfront to continue to see a balance of uses, not be overburdened, still be lovely and maintain our views of the bay in some way.
I think overburdened is a good word to use, better than specifically whether you can expand, move, or construct.
Because I think you've got to allow for a contraction and expansion. If somebody knocks something down, does that mean, oh wait, we've got extra space that we can build?
Fort Park may need some construction. I mean, that may be what's lacking at Fort Park is some infrastructure. I don't know. I'm just saying, I mean, by example, if you say you're discouraging construction, what if you can move public restrooms down there, or I guess or maybe that building goes. So I guess I like the idea of just balancing the uses and not overburdening any particular park or area.
Overburden goes both ways. You can overburden something with too much building, and you can also overburden by not allowing certain things to happen. That actually could
people can overburden
occur.
without the resources to manage.
That makes sense.
Question 13 about what's response are split on whether or not, and in what circumstances to allow commercial private uses at waterfront parks. Again, this is more of a general philosophical approach to how we use our waterfront. When it comes to land use planning, do we want to allow commercial uses at public waterfront spaces, and whether and how? I mean, we don't have that many waterfront spaces.
I think what jumps to mind would be if you went to a town and they had parasailing out of the public park. I don't think we actually do have a reasonable amount of balance between public space or public land and private land on the waterfront. Not a lot of it's commercial. I mean, I don't think we really need, I think that might be overburdening, is to have a public or a private entity profiting from the public park. I guess I wouldn't encourage it.
In some instances, right? I mean, we're leasing space to the ferry right now.
Ferry, dock and dredge.
Right.
We also allow IBS, Wallstroms to launch boats. We also allow the outfitter, for example. So, there's commercial uses going on at Fort Park. I mean, have we overburdened it?
Maybe that's enough just to leave it at that. Just right now, I'm sure you guys hear, Mike Johnson and you probably think people feel they are overburdened. They can't get in and out with a private boat because they're launching too many profitable boats.
But this would also get into things like allowing food trucks at the parks and things like that. So
Yes.
It's almost like you should make those marinas, because they've had such an influx on doing their, what we call valet service. They should do that on their own site. I mean, they're making so much bank off of doing a valet service and bringing people's boats in and out and in and out. And that's all, like you said, it's taking up the whole use of that public launch.
And it's true, but maybe again, some of this is for the Harbor Commission.
I think you're right. We have to set the goal of whether I guess, I wasn't thinking of some of the, ones that are already going on. I was thinking of new commercial and, operations on public parks.
Maybe the key on this is to touch on just making sure that the commercial uses don't negatively impact the ability of the public to use those facilities.
Or
And then the harbor
benefit residents.
Because some of the people that are getting their boats valet served are residents. I mean, it is, but I think the overburdening is a good way, and then what Jeff said.
You guys want me to keep on going?
Yeah, go. Let's
All
finish
right.
this.
Question 11. Half of the respondents think the city is not additional sidewalks. Again, this could be depending on where you live. If there's a sidewalk by you. But then again, there's people who live, for example, on Summit Street that don't want to see more sidewalks.
I think that this doesn't need to be a goal in the master plan. I think it's covered with so many of the if we get into a streetscape planning, which was favorable, if we get into those kind of other programs, I think a lot of semi-commercial developments we've had in recent years have been required to at least improve or replace, but I don't think to.
Well, the other piece.
I think connectivity and we want all those things. That sort of goes without saying. You're going to have some additional sidewalks.
But if we're building a community that people want to be in, I mean, one of the things is absolutely clear in the surveys of younger people and quite frankly older people who are a key demographic for us is that they want walkability and they want accessibility. And it is really hard to be on a street where there is no sidewalk and feel safe in walking. And then think about whether or not you have a stroller or whether or not you have a wheelchair or a walker. And I do think it's something that we should be thinking about expanding and land use planning, looking at where we don't have sidewalks and thinking about who's there, how do they access city facilities, how do they access amenities, and do we need to add sidewalks in those areas or not based on, and that, you know, I'm not saying we gotta put sidewalks everywhere right now, but I think, I really think it's something that is important. And
I
we
think
should
a
be-
coordinated, you know, I mean, when Harbor Car Care added on to their building, they had to put a sidewalk. Well, it's not connected on the north end or the south end to anything. So I mean, it's important that it would, but I guess maybe.
So in the earlier questions, I had a thing, if, you know, a new multifamily housing building goes in, required to put a sidewalk, or a new
Yeah,
business goes in,
Yeah.
you know, that there's no sidewalk required.
I mean, a lot of the things we look at that are special land use, one of the things is it, or even if it isn't a special land use, it has to have pedestrian vehicular interface, has to be safe, and there's no detriment, you know, so I think a lot of those things are covered, and I think if we get into absolutely include something that we should have connectivity but intelligently and with some forethought, not just sort of like, okay, you're building a building over here, put in 50 feet of sidewalk. Maybe there's a fund you pay into that builds sidewalks, and it wouldn't necessarily be, you know, if you're building where there already is one, you sort of get a free ride. If you're building where there isn't one, you have to pay for it. It may not be connected to anybody.
We gotta be careful with that because we're touching on stuff that we can't legally enforce.
Yeah.
We can't require a property owner that wants to develop something on this property to pay for resources that would
Go
benefit
somewhere
something
else.
over here.
Yeah.
We can include that in language at a meeting, but then once we approve it, we can't enforce to make them
Okay.
do that.
I guess just encourage connectivity in an intelligent, you know, logical manner.
Question 14, I think it's more of a Parks and Rec about general health. People are happy with the types of trails in the city, but with the first, you know, wood trails, that's hard to, we don't have that kind of land for that, but I think it's a Parks and Rec thing more so. Question 16, again, talks about the safety and how it's very unsafe or kind of unsafe to bicycle throughout town. Again, we're working on the bike, and I think maybe mentioning something about how we need more bike-friendly.
Connectors.
What's this, it's not streetscape, but smart streets or smart.
Complete streets.
Complete streets, I mean, that's sort of where I was
Yeah.
going with the
Yeah.
sidewalk, but you can't.
I think that's important, yeah. Survey 11, question 11, about renewable energy, and I think this is something we should also just mention more we don't mention real much about renewable energy in our master plan, so, you know, 83% believe that the electric department should pursue more renewable energy options, so talking about creating goals that encourages the city to establish its own local renewable energy system. We kind of did that with the solar panels on buildings, but, you know, talking about potentially, we have a lot of land throughout here and there, solar authority. Maybe we mentioned that as a goal that we want to look for land the city has, the potential for developing land for renewable energy projects. That would be renewable energy that we own and sell back. And then B is something that I don't know, you know, can we encourage residents to install renewable energy systems on their own properties, like solar or something? Do we want to go that far? You know, give them incentives in the zoning code. I don't know. That's, you know, I kind of talked about it with a little, Little Traverse Club.
Little Harbor.
Little Harbor Club, yeah, sorry, Little Harbor Club, and their big rooming house there, they were like, well, we were thinking about, you know, potentially putting solar and, you know, doing stuff there, so it got me thinking about, do we want to include that in, as an incentive, or?
Maybe it's enough, maybe the first thing to start with would be, you know, make an objective to review the zoning code and find what might be prohibitive, and decide if we need those things to be modified, if we just have to have them because they're a safety thing, but, you know, I think it might be good just to start with an objective of looking at the existing regulations and where are they discouraging it, and then can we encourage it in other places? So.
Question 2 for survey 12. This is more of a, you know, questions about city staff and how we function as boards. And so most respondents have little to no idea of our authorities and agencies that we're a part of. Fire, sewer authority, airport authority, Michigan Power Purchase Agency, Whistleblower Association, and others. This is again is on staff, maybe having a goal about, language about educating aware, making people aware of these things and government. I mean, this goes back to your question earlier about communication, you know,
Right.
people don't even know, like, no one knows about the fire authority, so if we're to go to those meetings, you know, do they need to?
Maybe that
Maybe
just
not,
just
but-
gets moved underneath that
Yeah.
communication,
I would think so.
Yeah.
not a
Good idea.
standalone thing.
Yeah.
It's sort of a
That's a good
general.
example.
Question 5 is maybe a loaded one. The majority of respondents think the city should offer some sort of incentives to protect the historic character of buildings. And, you know, defining what that is now is a different, what is historic, you know, older than 1970, 1930, you know, do we want to touch that? Is a question. Do we want to think about protections for historic homes or not, or buildings in general?
Maybe if there's an opt-in, but I don't know that, again, telling somebody what it can.
Well, incentives, of course,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
that's-
think if you, and I don't know how you do that, maybe there's more leniency. You know, the one thing that you might run into, and maybe this is an issue that you run into, but quickly for tonight is, it might be easier to renovate an existing historical home if some nonconformities could be potentially looked at differently if it is historical and relevant. You know, usually you can rebuild a three-dimensional shape, so however it has been, but I can't think of an example, but that might be an instance where we look at the zoning code and say, hey, do we have anything in here that's really discouraging you to do this? Most of what's discouraging it is going to be fire safety, I mean, building codes and general safety features that just an old house, old building doesn't have, and it's cost prohibitive to put them in.
Well, the one question I asked was, is a historic district needed too?
Yeah, I think the only historic building we have designated in the city is the Catholic Church. If I recall correctly, that's the
Yeah, I
only one
think-
that I've come across.
When the depot was up for some projects years ago, the
Okay.
question was asked, somebody thought it was a historical site. I think it has a plaque that might lead you to believe that, but I think in the end, it turned out that isn't necessarily. So I think you might be right.
I don't think it's on the state
I guess it-
register.
No, I
I
don't.
guess the
know.
question for me is this important for us to consider or not? Is this not something that we want to get into?
I say strongly, we do not want to get into this business at all. I lived in a community that had, and it was like a full-time person for enforcement and for
Yeah.
translating, and it was just horrible for the homeowners.
I think it might discourage a lot of things
Yeah.
we're contemplating in the master plan, encouraging it might
Grand
discourage.
Rapids has the Heritage Hill area, which is a
Yeah.
whole historic district. I mean, if you're gonna paint your house, you gotta go to the district and get the paint color.
Well, and if you
approved.
have a community that's homogeneous, it makes sense, but we really don't. I mean, I think
I
we'd
think
be
that's part
hard
of the
pressed
charm,
to
so.
figure out what to be the designated
What's the style?
right, exactly. So,
Yeah.
no,
I think
Okay.
after 120 years, we kind of like the way it looks.
Let's let that.
Question 9, now this comes to the words that people want to see out, and this is about the words we use in the master plan, right? So the majority of respondents want the city to be described in the following ways: safe, clean, charming, historic, quaint, recreational, traditional, unique, natural, quality, fun. Those are words that they picked as the most important words to describe the city. You know, my action item really is just to consider the value and meaning of these words and whether or not we want to and how to incorporate them in the plan.
I think we did a pretty good job at the onset of the master plan review
Yeah.
of sort of giving, I think, direction, certainly on a few of the words that are in there. And we can put the draft up, and if everybody from the public would love to see the word quaint littered throughout it, so be it. But I think we did a
Well,
pretty
I
good
think
job.
there are
on that.
other ways to incorporate that than
That
fact
idea
than
without
baking
using-
it into the master plan in some way that's value laden. I
Right.
think, you know,
It doesn't necessarily have to appear, I think what you're saying, 132 times in the plan document. It could be in there once or twice, but there's other ways to get to that point. Yeah.
And that was the last question I had, so the rest of them are in there. So I guess Larry, next steps.
With this information, we've been through an initial review of the background analysis. There's some beefing up that has to do beyond what we even talked about when we reviewed that. Because now we've discovered additional information like the history of short-term rentals, you know, and other things that need to go into that. That needs to be done. This, with the information that you provided to me on positives and negatives of the city as planning commission members saw them, and the surveys that we did from September through winter last year that we're talking about right now, our review of this we have, in my opinion, about 95% of the topics that the master plan needs to cover. Okay, in my opinion. What I would like to suggest at this point in time is staff, us here on this side of the room, draft from point A to point Z, the plan document, in a draft form. Okay, but we've got the topics. It's a matter of putting the language together and making the document flow. Not for public disclosure, for planning commission review. You may agree or disagree with what staff has done. Okay, which is great. It's your document, remember, it's not ours, it's yours. If there's things that we need to adjust, perfect. If there's things, well, we really need to have a focus group, more public input on this topic. Let's formulate a way to do that would be as objective as we can, and do that. And that would, I think, would help all of us move through this process in a more efficient manner than what we're currently doing. We're hitting upon summer now, and I know to have you come to twice a month meetings is going to be more difficult. Okay, and we've got 6 of the 9 here tonight, all right, which is great, it's wonderful, but it wasn't until 12:30 this afternoon that I found out that we actually had a quorum. And was I going to come or not to a meeting where we were going to cancel it? So we need to take all this information we have and put it between 2 covers in a draft and say, all right, let's go through this. You can sit down in the privacy of your own home and read it. We can do it as a group. Okay, we're going to do this chapter, this chapter, this chapter, this chapter. But you've had the benefit of seeing where everything is. Mm-hmm. Did we cover this enough? Did we use the right words? Did we get all the nuances that we've talked about here into that document? Thoughts?
I think that's a good approach. I think that's a good thing to give to everybody, and then we can sit and break it into. I mean, we've done a good job of going through this in meetings and the surveys and that, but I think that is the next step. I don't know what else, frankly, you would do other than that.
I do have one idea. I think that's great, and that will definitely move the whole plan forward. I'm just wondering if it's time for us to, there's 2 or 3 lightning rod issues. Our definition of housing, the kind of housing that we want to encourage. Maybe short-term rentals, and I can't remember, there's probably a third one that's red hot. Maybe it's views and trees and all that, but, is it?
Well,
I think it's
master building.
While you guys are doing this, does it make sense for us to meet at our next time and just actually bore in on those 2 or 3 things and try to wordsmith it?
Well, I honestly feel a little bit uncomfortable at this point. And this comes back to our very opening discussions of how, what is the level of plan review that we are doing? I don't feel like we have had enough public input.
Well, we've been a little limited in that.
I get that. And so that's where I'm at. Do we say, look, chalk it up to COVID, we've gotten what we can do. We understand that we review this plan. We should be at least looking at it annually. We look at it every 5 years. Let's get this done and then think about a more intensive process a couple of years from now.
I think it would,
or is it time to say, no, we have not done enough. Yeah. And so we need to postpone this to really get that public input at this point. And maybe it's only on a couple of topics. I mean, I agree. There's a fair amount of stuff in here that, we're not going to get a lot of public input on, and quite frankly, kind of whatever. But there are those, would having a couple of intensive public opportunities for the public to come tell us what their thoughts are about housing shape, how we think about housing and what goes into that master plan. Is it worth it to have the city staff put countless hours into drafting a document if we are going to have to go back and kind of at a certain level scrap those sections after we get a lot of public input? Maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't. I just don't feel like we have had enough public input at this point.
I think everybody probably doesn't feel we've had enough. Could we do these things sort of congruently in a sense, which is adopting these? You guys, I imagine what you have before you to put this, and I'm almost thinking it's more the structure and the pieces. Okay, now we're gonna take the Parks and Rec, we're gonna remove a lot of that, and we moved, a lot of the descriptions of the soils, we're putting that in an annex and those things, and kind of do the blocking. And then there are certain sections which fire away, how does the utility system, those things, but I think probably the biggest thing and maybe the way to think about it is, housing is a key element, and then, making it a great place to live, which makes it a great place to visit, and that ties in the land use and the objectives of long-term employment and meaningful employment. And maybe those are things we can run to whatever ability we're allowed, which is hopefully getting better with every week that goes by, the public to come and give input on these topics. In the meantime, they're working in the back shop, because otherwise, I'm afraid if we wait, put on hold the structure and the blocking and the easier, the worst cliche in the world of low-hanging fruit, to target those items, and then we pull out housing and we pull out,
Well, and this is
land use and employment. I think land use, housing, and employment are really all in the same.
They're a lot.
I see, this is what I see happening, and I think that's where I kind of agree with Larry here, is, for example, let's put together where we're at so far in our thoughts. And
Yeah.
when it comes to housing, it might be, all right, here's where we stand, we don't know where we stand on
Right.
housing. So this is the topic we need more public feedback. So then, but we can see maybe, Parks and Rec, we know that's gonna be minimized on, renewable energy, energy efficiency, that kind of stuff, nature, environment, we're good on that, there's not gonna be a lot of discourse probably from the public on that. Housing, short-term rentals, land use, actual density, stuff like that. Those things that, walkability, some of those things where like sidewalks, where this community split half and half, where we just don't have clear guidance. We have an understanding of where we're at, and then that's where we go to the public for, all right, these topics. And then that's gonna be a combination of in-person meetings and going to places maybe that we can actually reach out to people, different venues, if it's allowed, and more online feedback to narrow in on those topics. Because I think where Mary Catherine is right is that for some of this stuff, we don't have the right or enough information to make a decision on. But at least we have a structure, some guidance from you guys on what we do have and what we need.
And what could come out of this staff sort of doing the blocking of it is as we set aside these 2 or 3 major topics that are all very intertwined, I think at least having you sort of reflect back to us what you think we've been saying,
Yes.
then we know what to ask the public. Because if we have a public hearing tonight on housing, we need an agenda, we need at least 3 bullet points to okay, it's gonna be, short-term rentals is definitely in the mix. There's 2 or 3 things we need to pick out and focus
Density,
on.
yes.
Density, short-term rentals, and
Lot size.
lots of, so I guess,
house
I mean,
sizes.
that's the outline that we need to have, whether it's a more specifically or targeted surveys that we can do, and open house where somebody can come in if they're comfortable and is allowed, that gives us something, because if they walked in right now, they're gonna look at us and we're like, we wanna talk about housing, so.
That's why I thought maybe we could work on something that would get ready for public.
And maybe that's what
Maybe
this next.
Put out a couple straw proposals for each of these hot topics, and begin to structure how a public hearing could be
So
held.
maybe while staff, what you're saying, while staff is working on this, planning commission needs to start just having conversations about what you want to see more, what information you need more on those topics. And
Because our
I think
next,
that's fine. It gives you something to do.
our next special
while we're doing
meeting would
something.
be June 6th or something. So I mean, we keep that and keep it, but in the meantime, you guys have your, we probably wouldn't hear a lot from you on that unless you find something you need immediate feedback. But on the 6th, we should say, okay, housing and lot size. And, I think the things that Mark said about 600 square feet, I mean, those kinds of ideas. And then we put those ideas out, and if we get tarred and feathered, well, maybe we're on to the next, we adjust
So
that.
work in parallel kind of
Yeah,
on these
yeah.
things. I think that's.
And we shift to getting ready for public input, trying to structure it, trying to.
And do we agree that housing is the one we should start? I mean, that ties into land use and lot size and density, and target that for June 6th, where we all kind of, what do we think we need the public to respond to?
I think it'd be helpful if we had a summary of what we've just done. And, like redo this with our comments.
Narrow down on
and
that, yeah.
the stuff that's been thrown out. get it out of there so that we could look at those.
And that's-
streamline
yeah.
the process.
And that's almost what I mean by the blocking of it. Just say, okay, right now, this is sort of where we're headed, and these are big blanks, and we're gonna fill them in, but we're gonna set that aside, and you guys start working on it. This,
I kind of, from our last session 2 months ago, I did a real brief summary of what I heard you say. And I gave it to staff and they, yeah, good, thank you. And so I have notes here tonight that I can do the same thing and we can pass that back.
yeah, we can get the first one and the second one.
And they're very brief.
Yeah.
You know, some of them are just like, no opinion, some of them don't like the issue or strongly support.
And I think we've gone into some detail, in some topics, we've gone into enough detail, now we almost need an outline.
Yeah.
And just see where we really, you know, feel like we're at loose ends and need input.
Could one or a couple of us put together a outline for the next meeting, you know, recommended topics?
Yeah, subcommittee.
Yeah.
They create a subcommittee, yeah, I mean,
Well, I was
create
just-
a subcommittee. but
Yeah, I was
create
wondering,
it more, just get together and.
I was just wondering that for the June 6th meeting, we should have one of the resources that you spoke about here to assist us.
Yeah.
And, you know, in help define where we want to go. You know, I think that might be valuable.
Or just have an information session for us on a different date
Yeah.
or something.
I mean, I could see if Yarrow would be able to come up. So she's the director of Housing North,
Yeah.
which is the big regional entity that's working on housing and housing policy. Unfortunately, Emily Meyerson is not with the Housing Partnership anymore. It was only a part-time position and she just couldn't make it work with the other stuff that she was doing. So the Little Traverse Bay Housing Partnership is working on funding for a full-time position and then we'll be hiring, but Yarrow is a great resource.
Yeah, I
It's
think that'd be great.
very knowledgeable.
It's enough to say the June 6th meeting, we're gonna focus on the idea of, you know, housing issues and whether, and we all kind of have, you know, I think individually, we all sort of have our interests and just sort of bring some ideas to the meeting of, okay, these are some either questions we want to ask the public or actually propose some ideas we want to see, or, and again, we're thinking of the master plan, not zoning ordinance. So these are big thematic things that,
Big picture.
you know, big picture things, you know, what do we want to get? We need to get public input on, okay, you want to have minimum square footage of 600 square feet. Those things, you know, but I think the goal should be smaller housing, you know, smaller unit, or smaller minimum standards or something like that, as opposed to numbers. But, and examples are always helpful, but not.
I was gonna say, I think examples are really helpful.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, you,
And pictures are really helpful.
yes, really
Pictures
helpful.
would be essential for public input.
And that's where we, the surveys, where, you know, was hard to
Yeah.
convey, you know. We were sending out these massive amounts of surveys. If you also add all this educational stuff at the same time, then people are gonna, 20 minutes on each, 30 minutes on each, they're gonna. So that's where the surveys lack, where these in-person kind of.
And maybe there's a way with, you know, with the advertising for the June 6th meeting is to say a discussion on housing. And just, at least that would give the public some idea that we might get more that showed up because they know, okay, well, that's important, or I understand it, or I'm ticked about it, or happy about it, so.
Nancy says the meeting is June 3rd, FYI.
Okay.
You keep that same.
Thank you, Nancy.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Do you want me to reach out to Yarrow and see
Yeah.
if she would be available or just have some resources from her?
Yeah.
You know, if there's something we could review in advance, that would be
Yeah, it might be
Most
more
effective.
efficient use of her time than us sitting there going, we like housing.
Yeah, if they have best practices or recommended,
I think even just
Right.
like current
Consideration.
contemporary language for these.
you gotta see it with them.
Yeah, Mary, if you want to find something to put together or whatever and send it to me, I'll share it with everybody before the meeting then.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Any,
You're the subcommittee.
any
I
member
guess I
comments?
am a subcommittee.
Member comments for anyone here or online?
I only got one comment, that's Arbor Fest is May 29th, so planting trees out there, giving away socks, treats, granola bars from my sister's bake shop, seedlings. So anyway, come volunteer, plant a tree,
May 29th.
9 AM to 12 PM, morning.
Any other member comments? Next meeting is regular meeting, we already have set, and June 3rd is the special meeting on housing. Okay, we're adjourned. Perfect.